I'm Shekara Grant. I'm from Cherry Brook, Nova Scotia, and this is my travel experience. So I love to read. I obviously love to travel. I'm very precarious in my interests. I can move from thing to thing on a daily basis. For me, traveling has always been the big thing that defines me. When I was a kid, my grandmother's sister lives in Detroit, so we'd go there to visit all the time. And I just, for some reason, can't forget when I was like 6 or 7, we went to Detroit and the ice cream truck was passing. And I think everyone's heard about like the ice cream truck sound that comes from them, but when I was growing up, we never had that. There wasn't an ice cream truck that came through Cherry Brook. So for some reason, that always stood out in my mind. So my family did go on vacations every once in a while. We actually did 2 big family vacations, both to Jamaica. But I was actually in Air Cadets when I was 12. So I got chosen, I don't know how, but I got chosen to go to Saskatchewan without my parents. Me and a bunch of my friends were able to go to Saskatchewan. Obviously my mom had a heart attack because I didn't go with family, but that was the first time I traveled without like family or people that I'd normally traveled with. I got the bug like really young. It made me comfortable traveling by myself because I had a great experience. And then ever since then, I haven't stopped. Yeah, so when I was in high school, I remember there were some presentations happening at Dartmouth High for the Explore program. I didn't think too much of it until grade 12 when I really started looking into it. And it's essentially a program that allows you to go to a different university in Canada and to practice your French. So I actually took that opportunity and went to Montreal and lived there for a month. Studying French and just like taking in Montreal culture. So that was the second time I left home without family, and that time it was for a month. And then pretty much ever since then, I've kept moving around. Once I was in university, I had the opportunity to go to Australia, which I lived in for 7 months. I was able to go to France twice, 7 months each time. So yeah, I've had most of my travel experiences have been through school. In Montreal, I was there to learn French, to practice my French. That was really cool. Also getting to see French Canada was very fascinating because it is quite different than the rest of Canada. In Australia, I was in my 2nd year of university. I was on an exchange program. So I was able to study sociology, which is what I was studying at home, and French, but in a completely different environment. The way that they went to school was very different than us here. For example, here our terms last 3 months, whereas there their terms last 5 months. So that was, yeah, very, very eye-opening to kind of see how different the university experience is. And then when I was able to go to France, I was actually teaching. So I wasn't learning, I was teaching French kids English. So every time I've traveled, it's been for a different reason. So my degree was in sociology and French. I did a combined honors. And I think a lot of times when you're studying, it's hard to see the big picture. So for me, going to countries like France and completely understanding the language, being able to be a part of that culture and learn about that culture really kind of showed me the benefit that my education did give to my travel experience. So it is very interesting traveling as a person of color. I think France was definitely very interesting because there is a very large Black population in France, of course, with the history of colonization of Africa by the French and all of that. So that experience was very, very different. I learned how much language influences your experience. So as an English speaker, I didn't really experience as much of the negative impacts of being a person of color as some, because the Western world is obviously seen very differently. But traveling around Europe to places where I didn't speak the language, it was a little bit difficult. Again, I think being a native English speaker was a huge determinant of my experience, because I did have friends from other countries who did have some very harsh experiences while traveling. I think, you know, being bilingual, learning French, especially as an African Nova Scotian, has really opened my eyes as well to understanding some of the issues that we faced, not just as African Nova Scotians, but as an African diaspora. Being able to read critical race theory in French and being able to truly understand those words, because sometimes when you translate, it's not the same thing. That's really influenced my viewpoint on some of the issues facing our communities. Yeah, I think it's no secret that traveling is expensive, so a lot of my budgeting and understanding how to manage money has come from my traveling. You absolutely don't want to be in a foreign country with no money, so that has been a huge lesson that traveling has given me. As well, I think in terms of my interests, I've been able to shape them because of my experiences traveling. So I think actually a lot of my passion for issues affecting African Nova Scotians and the Black diaspora actually does come from my traveling, and understanding that a lot of the issues that I'm concerned with here in our province are happening all over the world. And I think especially with me living in France, that was a very eye-opening experience, because I find a lot of early Black thinkers or authors like James Baldwin, for example, have lived specifically in France or Europe as an attempt to kind of get away from the things happening to them in their own home country. Myself, just like them, I think being there really opened my eyes to the things that we're doing wrong in Canada, also some of the things we're doing right. So for me, I wanted to come back home because I think that we have a lot of work to do, especially towards like African Nova Scotian prosperity. And I think that with everything I've learned abroad, visiting different countries and seeing kind of how they operate, I think that I can bring that to support our local community here in Nova Scotia. Some advice I would give to anyone who's considering traveling through education is to absolutely do it. It gives you a lot of hands-on experience with whatever you're studying to understand how it relates internationally, but it also teaches you so many things about money management and career management, and it's only going to enrich kind of your university experience. What I would also suggest too, if we're talking about African Nova Scotians, is to consider going to school locally. Like for me, I decided to go to DAL because I knew that I could save money on residence fees, and that's how I was able to afford to move to Australia for my exchange program. So I definitely think that if you want to travel through education, it's possible, and you should 100% take the opportunity. Like I think Black women, we're forced to be very independent, we're forced to be very strong, but I think traveling with all of those skills I already developed, it made me a lot more confident in my experiences abroad. I was able to make decisions that keep me safe because I'm used to doing that in my everyday life. I was able to make good financial decisions because, you know, I have to do that again in my everyday life because of the circumstances we're in. So I think that Black women should absolutely take the opportunity to travel. I think that we are honestly the strongest cohort of people, and we, you know, deserve to have those experiences, but we can also handle it in a way that keeps us safe and smart. And I think that it will only benefit our communities should you choose to come back after your travels. In general, travel has taught me resilience. I think that it is very isolating sometimes to go abroad and be on your own, but that experience of figuring your way through all of the challenges that are thrown at you when you're traveling, not only does it show me resilience, but also I feel very empowered by being able to do that and being comfortable in that space. So if I were going to name a few words to describe what traveling means to me, it would be resilience and empowerment. My favorite countries I've been to are probably Italy and Spain because I love food, I love music, and I love drinks, and those two countries have all of those things. In Italy, specifically Sicily, like the island, was incredibly beautiful, and I went in off season, like February, and it was great. I also really love Switzerland because it's very peaceful and quiet and tranquil. I actually have this memory of myself reading Shekara's autobiography. I got off at a random stop on this train line, and I just sat there and read because the train passes every half hour, but it was a beautiful mountain spot. Being by myself, literally no houses around, being by myself in nature, it was just there was something very special about that. And reading Asada at the same time was just. So actually my favorite recent travel experience was I was able to go to Nice in France, and James Baldwin actually spent most of his life in this little town called Saint-Paul-de-Vence, which is just outside of Nice. So I went there. Unfortunately his house is not there anymore, but I basically went and sat and read his words in the town where he lived, where he chose to spend the last 20 years of his life. The other thing about travel is that it allows you to connect to people like your ancestors and have these experiences. Sometimes when you have these experiences, traveling, I know that I did it, but it's only times like this where I'm oh, I've been to so many countries. I feel I've learned so much that I can give to my community while I'm here. I've never really wanted a career because I've just been so interested in traveling, but because I've now had so many experiences in different countries, I really feel ready to kind of use those experiences to support my community here. So that's another thing that's keeping me grounded is I want to do my research here and travel here. Like, we have 52 African Nova Scotian communities in Nova Scotia, and I can promise you I probably haven't even been to 10 of them. So for me, like, yes, traveling can look like going to Australia, going to France, but it could also look like going to a community I've never been in my province. So right now, that's kind of where my head's at, is like, I want to know where I'm from, like where I'm really from and its history, and then yeah, go learn about someone else too.